Okay, I got the plan. You didn't tell anyone, did you? All right, so obviously I'm not displaying a secret plan today. I'm sorry, my green screen's a little wonky. Changing colors kind of made it complicated, but never mind. Let's talk about privacy. Privacy is important. I'm adamant about protecting you from the prying eyes of government. Um, I firmly believe that the idea of compromising your privacy for the sake of safety is a fallacy. Um, there's also some practical day-to-day issues, but besides the really bad security fallacy. And there's several reasons I think this. Number one is just experience. I used to work in a regulated industry, and we won't go into too many of the details because I'll have to implicate agencies and companies, so on and so forth. But I used to have to send in source code to this agency. And sometimes my boss would, within like 10 or 15 minutes, get phone calls from one of our competitors, um, and it would pertain to new things in the source code. So, and this didn't happen like just once. Sorry, I had to check to see if the mic was there. I took it off a minute ago. Make sure I got it back. This didn't happen like once. This happened repeatedly. It was a pattern, and the other company didn't even care because they were dominant in that industry, and the establishment between the correlation between them and the regulatory body in question was well known. Um, we could have went screaming wolf all we wanted, and the response would have been, mm-hmm. um, so when you give up your privacy to government, you don't know who you're giving it to. You're giving it often to basically the highest bidder, or who um, who the people in that agency hope to work for someday. That's who you're giving your privacy to. Um, and I have a really, this is Gloria's example. I'm not the hugest Facebook fan. I'm not the hugest Mark Zuckerberg fan, but I have this really nice example of industry trying to do the right thing in Facebook. Is Facebook wants to implement um, end-to-end encryption in their messaging. For all I know, maybe they already have. I didn't go back and research how far they are in this, but that's a beautiful thing, and that's what I would want to do. And this comes up a lot, and in the age of stolen credit card numbers and so on and so forth, this isn't just a social media specific thing. Is if you're a company and you can protect yourself from knowing someone's private information, you are so much better off. Because if you don't know it, you can't leak it. You can't be responsible for it. You don't have to monitor your own people to make sure they're not doing something nefarious with it. Um, and this kind of comes up again recently. We have kids at home, and they're educating from home. They're learning from home. They're doing remote learning. We have people doing remote medicine with their doctors. I mean, you don't really want people at these companies able to see and listen in on these conversations, do you? Well, our Justice Department does. They wrote a letter. It was an open letter. You can go back and look at it, to Mark Zuckerberg. It's dated October 4th, and they're insisting that Facebook not use end-to-end encryption, because you see, if Facebook can't eavesdrop in on your conversations, fails, if Facebook engineers it so Facebook can't hear you, then Facebook also can't hand that information over to the Justice Department when they ask. And I say, too bad. I mean, it's more important that we be directly safe, and we need to be safe from our Justice Department as well. I'll get into that in a little bit. Um, but another reason it's a fallacy is I have worked in encryption. I don't know what percent of the population I know more about encryption than. 90, 99, 99.9. I don't know. I'm not quite an expert. I mean, I've played with it. I've implemented it. Um, I've used existing algorithms. But you know, I wouldn't label myself an expert in the field. But you really don't have to be for this next one. It's kind of a natural instinct that if you weaken the security so it makes it easier for the government to decrypt it, it's going to be easier for everyone to decrypt it. And that sounds like a lewd claim that the government would even do that, but they've done it multiple times in the past. I mean, I remember this one's kind of laughable, but in the 90s, under the Clinton administration, there were some laws passed about exporting certain encryption technology. Now, it's like we were allowed to have it this secure, and we were allowed to export it this secure to the outside world. And really, once you understand how that code works, you can make it this secure yourself. It's just because all you're talking about is the number of bits being used. But what was really interesting is in those days, to get extensions to the Linux kernel to make yourself more secure, you had to import the code. You had to import into the US the security code. Why? Because the servers couldn't be hosted in the US that had that code, because then they would be exporting it to the world. And that was illegal. I'm completely serious. We had to import it because it was illegal to export it, as if the world didn't already have it. But that's the sort of thing the government's done in the past, and I'm not sure they exactly are doing any of that right now, but I'm sure they are. And there's kind of a related, but you could do this in here with that. And it kind of breaks into two parts. One is the idea of the government having a secret key. Well, if the government has a secret key, then it becomes a tremendously valuable secret key. And once it's a tremendously valuable secret key, yeah, somebody's going to figure out how to get it. And when they get it, they're going to have your data, just like it wasn't encrypted at all. So there's kind of a corollary to that, which you go, instead of having a secret key, what we'll do is we'll have this known kind of allowed pattern. And in encryption, sometimes you use these things called polynomials. So we want to limit the polynomial space in some ways. And in the past, like with cell phones, they did that really, really stupidly. They just said this bit will always be 0. But you have these, they're called polynomials, but you have polynomials in some encryption schemes. And you can have these sort of secret techniques of describing the space, the polynomial space that the polynomials are allowed to be in. And in this way, it's weakened, like I talked about earlier, was a really bad idea. But it's weakened only if you have sort of the secret. Well, all you get is a hybrid of what I was talking about before. Now you have this, really valuable secret for somebody to steal from our government or buy from somebody in our government. And, once it gets out, we're back where we started. Yeah, it's easier for the government, our governments to decrypt. It's easier for the foreign governments to decrypt. It's easier for, just nefarious people to decrypt. So that's also a very, very bad idea. But I mentioned earlier, there's sort of some practical implications that just come from sort of like backlash to all this, just paranoia. I mean, over the years, I've seen so many suggestions that relate to the warehousing or sharing or moving of data. And this can have anything to do with infrastructure, like toll roads. Libertarians are kind of divided on toll roads. I personally kind of like them, but there are some problems. But the big thing that scares the bejesus out of me about toll roads is people who have no business knowing where we're going will know absolutely everything about where we're going. We need a government that protects us from that, not someone who tries to peer in on that. And this isn't even something we can fix immediately. Like if we just changed it right now and government quit trying to spy on us, it's going to be years, probably decades, before it really moves the needle on trust that much. And the problem is we can't do this because we don't trust the government to keep the data safe. Even if they swinky, pinky swear, we'll keep it safe. We're not going to believe them. We're not going to believe them for a long time. This has to be a cultural change that they will not acquire that data. They will keep that data safe. And then we can start putting things like that on the table. And, again, I was just talking about education. I mean, we've got the Justice Department wanting companies to make it so they can peer in on the communications. Yeah, that means your wife, while she's talking to the doctor about something, or that means your kids talking to their teacher. Really? You want to encourage companies to compromise the security there? Yeah, I don't think so. But there's another reason, and I have to go a little hyperbolic with this, and I think that's okay, because the other side of this argument always goes hyperbolic. Their argument is always, what about the terrorist? What about the bad guys? And they say it over and over and over again, and the media repeats it over and over and over again, and pretty soon the hyperbolic becomes the norm. I mean, people are just like, casually sipping coffee, and yes, but they'll kill us all. No, first, that's not going to happen. It's hyperbolic. Yes, it will happen sometimes. On the other hand, and this is where my other extreme case comes in, what about the early days of Chairman Mao? What about plots against him? That's an extreme case. What about plots against Stalin, plots against Mussolini, plots against Hitler? I mean, these are all things that are planned in secrecy. They all require privacy. So I want to be clear here. If the dark day ever comes that we need Operation Valkyrie in this country, I want it to work. I want there to be a chance it works. And when that dark day comes, we're not going to be able to say, well, citizens should have their privacy because, and you don't even have to go that dark. It can just be, somebody plotting not violently, peacefully, somebody coming up with a clever plan against Mitch McConnell. My buddy Brad Barron, how safe's his campaign data? How safe are his communications? What about Amy McGrath? You thought I sound paranoid with Brad? What about Amy? I've talked to some ex-Republicans earlier this year. I hear some really dark stuff. I mean, it's basically on par with what I was talking about earlier in the industry I'm not mentioning, and the company I'm not mentioning, and the data making its way out that I'm not mentioning. We need to be safe. We need our information to be safe. We need our privacy. Basically, in my mind, privacy and free speech work together to hopefully keep our right to bear arms moot on the dark days. I mean, that's really what we want. We want to be able to have these discussions privately, build consensus, and figure out how to do things about it peacefully. That's what we want. But along the way, if you're not, that paranoid, and I honestly recommend you do be, let's not call it that paranoid, let's call it that vigilant. I really think we should be that vigilant, because when the day comes we realize we need to be that vigilant, it's too late. We have to be that vigilant now, not when we need it. We have to do it now. But we also need to do it now because there's all those other things that become more palatable to our society around sharing or collecting information when you feel like the government isn't doing something nefarious with it. And that gets back to government respecting privacy. And it also has a lot to do with just government overreach. We need a smaller government. We need a government that we can trust. And we need a government that's interested in protecting you, not protecting themselves. Our government was not founded to protect themselves. who was founded to protect we the people. That's all I have for you today. I have a couple of ideas for tomorrow's broadcast, but as always, let me know if you have ideas or if you have something you want to hear from me about. I'm doing this so that people can get to know who I am and can figure out if they want to vote for me. Be sure to spread this to your friends who might be interested in voting for somebody who believes in empowering the people instead of empowering government. Great. Have a good day. Talk to you tomorrow.